Yera
So welcome back. The second of our big three Upanishadic questions is now going to look inward and asks, who am I really? Right? What's the nature of the self? What makes me me? Is it just my body, or is there something different from that? Is there anything deeper or more subtle than the physical body that survives its death? Is there a soul? And if so, what does it look like? Right? Our friend wise Yajnavalkya tackles this question in a rather quaint scene, I think, that involves another kind of intellectually oriented woman. This time it's his wife Maitreyi. So once upon a time, Yajnavalkya decides to become a renouncer and he wants to enter that fourth stage of life. So he summons Maitreyi and also his second wife, Katyayani, to have a conversation about how his estate should be divided up between the two of them when he goes. Let's see how the conversation proceeds and how Yajnavalkya ends up answering our question about what the self is, what the soul really is. Now, Yajnavalkya had two wives, Maitreyi and Katyayani. Of the two, Maitreyi was a woman who took part in philosophical discussions, while Katyayani's understanding was limited to womanly matters. One day he was preparing to undertake a different mode of life. Yajnavalkya said, Maitreyi, I'm about to go away from this place, so come, let me make a settlement between you and Katyayani. Maitreyi asked in reply, if I were to possess the entire world, sir, would it or would it not make me immortal? No, said Yajnavalkya, it would only permit you to live the life of a wealthy person. Through wealth, one cannot expect immortality. How's that for an important lesson that few of us today pay heed to? Anyway, this makes Maitreyi long for a better parting gift from her husband than just money. Here's what she said. What's the point in getting something that will not make me immortal? Retorted Maitreyi. Tell me instead, sir, all that you know. This makes her husband happy. Yajnavalkya said in reply, you have always been very dear to me, and now you've made yourself even more so. Come, my lady, I will explain it to you. But while I'm explaining it, try to concentrate. I guess you could call this the kind of earliest recorded case of mansplaining in ancient Indian literature. I don't know. Now, what he tells her might make us a bit shocked. In fact, it shocked me when I first learned of it. It's in that same kind of repetitive sermon-like style of the Upanishads that we saw last time. That uses this kind of repetition to drill those key points in the minds of the listeners. And it's about now the inner self, the Atman. One holds a husband dear, you see, not out of love for the husband, rather it's out of love of oneself, one's Atman, that one holds a husband dear. One holds a wife dear, not out of love for the wife, rather it's out of love for oneself that one holds a wife dear. One holds children dear, not out of love for the children, rather it's out of love for oneself that one holds children dear. I'm curious what you think about this. It's jarring. One usually takes these kinds of loves to be completely selfless. What does it mean to insist that love is ultimately a self-oriented action? Like when you're loving your children, are you really loving yourselves? How would it really? It's kind of hard to accept. Right? So he's going to go on and connect it even further. One holds wealth dear, not out of love for wealth. Rather, it's out of love for oneself that one holds wealth dear. One holds livestock dear, not out of love for the livestock. Rather, it's out of love for oneself that one holds livestock dear. One holds priestly power dear, not out of love for that priestly power. Rather, it's out of love for oneself that one holds priestly power dear. One holds royal power dear, not out of love for royal power. Rather, it's out of love for oneself that one holds royal power dear. He then says the same thing for the worlds, the gods, the Vedas, the living beings, ultimately everything, the cosmos. Here is called the whole. One holds the whole dear, not out of love for the whole. Rather, it's out of love for oneself that one holds the whole dear. So how could this be? What on earth is Yajnavalkya talking about here? Doesn't it kind of go against like every decent thing that we've been taught, that you should be selfless in your love for others, that you should dedicate yourself to other people, your children, your wife, your husband, to things that are bigger than yourself, right? I think what it's a puzzle actually, and it's supposed to be jarring. But I think what Yajnavalkya is doing is trying to get you to see that actually you don't really know who yourself is. You think you do, but the 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 person that you know to be yourself is actually some construction of what you think yourself is, while your true self, your Atman, is something different altogether. So here's what I'm talking about. You see, Maitreyi, it's one's self, Atman, which you should see and hear, and on which you should reflect and concentrate. For when one has seen and heard one's self, when one has reflected and concentrated on one's self, one knows this whole world. He then explains how all those things that we hold dear will actually forsake us if we don't see them as already lying within our inner self. We're going to skip this section for now, but have a look at the bottom line argument that he delivers. He says, all of these, priestly power, royal power, worlds, gods, beings, the whole, all that is nothing but the self. It's pretty powerful stuff, actually. Right? Yajnavalkya then gives many other examples of how everything is actually contained within yourself, even though it may not seem like it. Right? And he uses everyday examples to make his case. It's actually really fun to go through all of these examples, but for now I want to just look at the very last one that he gives. It's like this. A mass of salt has no distinct core and surface. The whole thing is just a single mass of flavor. So indeed, my dear, this self has no distinct core and surface. The whole thing is a single mass of cognition. It arises out of and together with these beings, and it disappears after them. So I say, after death, there is no awareness. So all of this strange speculation starts to get maybe a little bit too much for Maitreyi. So she interrupts him at this point in a kind of charming scene, I think. After Yajnavalkya said this, Maitreyi explained, now, sir, you have utterly confused me. I cannot perceive this at all. He replied, look, I haven't said anything confusing. It's kind of PO'd, I don't know. This self, you see, is imperishable. It has an indestructible nature. For when there's a duality of some kind, then the one can see the other, the one can smell the other, the one can taste the other, the one can greet the other, the one can hear the other, the one can think of the other, the one can touch the other, the one can perceive of the other. Right? Now he's going to move on to the kind of true paradox of inner knowledge. This is an important passage here. When, however, the whole has become one's very self, the Atman, then who is there for one to see, and by what means? The whole here is the equivalent to the idea of Brahman that he talked about last time, actually. Who is there to smell, and by what means? Who is there to taste, and by what means? Who is there to greet, and by what means? Who is there to hear, and by what means? Who is there to think of, and by what means? Who's there for one to touch, and by what means? Who is there for one to perceive, by what means? Right? Now he arrives at our million-dollar question that we're all asked to reflect on. Right? It's the tough question that the Upanishads want you to find an answer for, because it's going to be a kind of wedge that we can use to differentiate the true self from the perceived semblance of ourselves, which we carry around as false images of ourselves in our heads. By what means, he asks, can one perceive him by means of whom one perceives the whole world? So how can you look at the one who's doing the looking, basically? He then explains the final secret to his wife. About this self, this Atman, one can only say, not this, not that. Neti, neti in Sanskrit. It's one of these big statements. It's ungraspable, for he cannot be grasped. He is undecaying, for he is not subject to decay. He has nothing sticking to him, for he does not stick to anything. He is not bound, yet he neither trembles in fear nor suffers injury. Does it sound familiar, right? It's exactly like the Brahman, isn't it? Only it's right there inside you. Look, says Yajnavalkya, by what means can one perceive the perceiver? There, I've given you the instructions, Maitreyi. That's all there is to immortality. After saying this, Yajnavalkya walks away. What a kind of beautiful ending, right? Leaving us with this central puzzle for us to solve, just like Maitreyi has to solve it. How can one perceive the perceiver? How, in other words, can we have a subject position to view this world if everything in this world, the whole that we can see, is also subsumable into that very subject position that we have? So to sum it all up, Yajnavalkya teaches us two different concepts, right? First, he says there's a single stable reality behind all of the universe. That's what we saw in the last segment. That's Brahman. It's imperceptible, it's imperishable, it's infinite. In this segment, what we saw is that there's also this soul inside of us that animates us, that gives us an individual sense of existence. It's also indescribable, immeasurable, unchangeable, beyond death and decay. The big Upanishadic secret, shh, don't tell anybody, right, is that these two different things are actually exactly the same thing. That Brahman equals Atman. That's the biggest Vedic bandhu of them all. Right? If you can understand that unity, if you can realize it, that both the world that we think we perceive and the person we think we are, both of these are false, and actually the true reality is that eternal, unperishable one, then we can liberate ourselves from the material world, which is perishable, decaying, and subject to death. Right? Given all that, then there's only one question that remains. What happens to this Atman, this soul, after death? Right? How can it merge with that Brahman, which it's identical to anyway? Well, Yajnavalkya doesn't go into these details. He just walks away, right? Instead, we're going to have to turn to another Upanishad called the Katha Upanishad, where a brash young boy decides to go and ask death himself what happens when you die. No better authority to ask. That's what we're going to turn to next time when we continue on in our train ride through ancient Indian cultural history. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.